Okay, so first and foremost, this is going to be in the merit of my grandmother's refuah shleimah, Sar Bas Gittel. Purim is a time of Yeshuos, and she needs one right now, so hopefully we can move things a little bit. Okay, so as always, we're coming into a Chag, we're coming into a new Moed, we're coming into Purim. We're always trying to understand what's the essence of this time, what are we supposed to be focused on, what's the bigger, broader idea of what's coming. We know that one of the big outcomes of Purim is this idea of Kimu V'Kiblu, that after everything happens with the whole miracle of Purim, all of a sudden the Jews, Kimu V'Kiblu, they had a new acceptance of Torah. We'll have to look and see exactly what that is. But one thing that we also have to try to understand is that the Gemara in Megillah says that there were 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses that prophesied or prophesied to the Jewish people, right? Meaning those are the ones whose prophecies were relevant to everybody. But the Gemara says that in fact there were really there was double the amount of prophets in the land of Israel than Jews that left Egypt. But these were the prophets whose prophecies were relevant for everybody. 48 and 7. And yet, with all 48 and 7, none of them ever added or took anything away from the Torah until the reading of the Megillah. That means that there's something about the mitzvah of reading of the Megillah which is completely unique to Purim, to Megillah, that doesn't happen anywhere else in all of Judaism. So that also somehow was an outcome of the entire miracle. So those are the two major points we're going to try to understand. So the building block where we're starting from is the Gemara in Shabbos. We are on page 88, folio A, which is a great Gemara, a lot of discussion about Torah, and particularly the following idea. V'yisyatzu b'tachti sahar, that's in Yisro, before the Jews are preparing to receive the Torah, and it says that they settled underneath the mountain. So there's a grammatical problem here. They didn't say mitachat hahar, it said betachtit hahar, which sounds like they're literally inside the bottom of the mountain. Which, you know, again, whenever we see a glaring grammatical error in the Torah, we say, well, what's the idea that's being relayed to us over here? So in the Gemara over here, Amar of Avdivi bar Chama bar Chasa, Malavet shekafa kodesh baruch aleim esahar kegigis, that Hashem took the entire Mount Sinai, He dangled it over the Jewish people like a barrel. The Amar lahem imatem mekavu mator mutav. If you receive the Torah, great, great. V'im lav sham tek v'raschem. And if not, this will be your burial place. That was the reception that we had for the Torah. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, a shocking thing. Mikan moda rabba lo raisa. This is a great claim against the Torah. What is the great claim against the Torah? Rashi expounds over here and says that if you go to Beis Din, if a person goes to court, and we say, look, there are laws, there are rules, this is not an anarchy, you have to do things a certain way, and you didn't do them, and now you have to pay up. And the person says, I'm an honest. I was not at fault. Right? In this case, I was forced into the entire parameters that were given, and therefore how can you hold me accountable? So Rav Acha bar Abba is actually saying that the Jews could not be held accountable for punishments, for not keeping the Torah, because we always have a claim against the Torah. We could always lean back and say, What do you want from us? We were forced to keep it. We didn't want to keep it. Hashem dangled a mountain over our heads and said, keep it or I'll bury you here. Right? It wasn't our choice. So you would think that it would be hard to establish a religion with that sort of a problem, that at any moment, loophole, that we could do whatever we want and say, not my fault. So that needs a little bit of understanding. But however, Rava comes after and says, Afal pi kain, even still, Hadur kablu b'mei Achashverosh, they went back and they received the Torah in the times of Achashverosh. Diksiv kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. It says kimu v'kiblu, the Jews established and they received, right? Now that's also grammatically not the way you're supposed to write it. And as a matter of fact, if you look in the Megillah, also in other places it says it the other way around. First you're makabel, first you receive something, and then you're makayim, and then you establish it. You don't establish and then receive it. So how do we understand that the verse says kimu first, then kiblu afterwards? Kaimu ma shekiblu kvar. They established what they had already received, meaning what? That the Torah was given to them at the beginning by force. Rava says Purim time comes along, and now we receive the Torah from our own free will, from our own desire. That's the starting point where we're going to start it. Okay? So first of all, we see that the Torah was foisted upon us against our will. That's a problem. Mordechai Rabbi Reiser, we have a great claim against the Torah. However, whatever happened on Purim happened, all the miracles, and we somehow got rid of that problem because of Kimu V'Kiblu, because we came and we reaccepted it, not by force. Okay? Any questions before we move on? Okay.
Seems there was a lot of pressure at the time.
It seems that there was a lot of pressure to be Jewish, even without a booby around. Okay. So the question, the first famous question, Tosfos asks the question here, or really here, but before Tosfos asks the question, it's already brought up in the Medrash Tanchuma. The Medrash itself asks the question, which is, wait a second, when we went to Sunday school, they didn't teach it to us that way. They said, Nasa v'nishma, right? In Parshas Mishpatim, before we received the Torah, all the Jews, Moshe says, okay, this is like basically what's going to happen. How do you guys feel about it? And everybody said, Nasa v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, and that's a very big deal. The fact that we said Nasa before we said Nishma means essentially we trust Hashem 100%. We don't even care what's written there. If Hashem said it, we'll do it. We'll figure it out what it was after. Right? Because Baruch Hu says, who revealed the secret of the angels to my children? That they knew to put Nasa before Nishma. They knew to put doing before receiving. That basically when you are coming down to universal truths, right? When you're coming down to the source of all morality, you don't have to ask questions. You just do it because if Hashem says it, that is what morality is. There's no morality before Hashem. That's the greatness of the Jewish people. It says that 600,000 malachim came down of Nasa, 600,000 malachim came down of Nishma. They gave them a crown for Nasa, they gave them a crown for Nishma. The Medrash goes on and on about what an amazing accomplishment it was that we, out of our own free will, received the Torah in such a remarkable way. Says the Medrash Tanchuma, wait a second, so what's this V'yisatzu mitachtis ahar? What's going on in the Gemara and Shabbos? Wait, what was Rav Acha bar Abba saying? Which one was it? Did Hashem force us to receive the Torah? Or did we actually receive the Torah from our own free will? Okay? That's the contradiction. So, however we answer this contradiction, it's going to have to help us with understanding this Gemara in Shabbos. So, we're going to start with Tosfos' approach. Tosfos has a very interesting approach. Tosfos wants to know, so why did Hashem have to force us, if we received it on our own free will, why did Hashem have to force us to receive the Torah? So Tosfos says like this. Perhaps, Hashem was worried that perhaps, when the Jews see the great fire on Har Sinai, when they see the great fire on the mountain, they'll panic, they'll back out, right? They'll say, whoa, this is not what we signed up for. And so therefore Hashem had to force them at that point, right? Meaning before they knew everything that they had signed up for, they said it out of their own free will. But just in case they panic and they're going to try to back out, Hashem's going to force them at that point to receive the Torah. And that's why he had to hang the mountain over them to force them not to back out from receiving the Torah, which they had given at first. Now, the Maharal in the Or Chadash, right, which is his commentary on Megillas Esther, he has some issues with it because, as we said, this is the greatest, Na'aseh v'Nishma was the greatest accomplishment of the Jewish people, right? This was the greatest thing we had ever done, the fact that we said Na'aseh before Nishma. So what's this idea that Hashem's now nervous, we didn't really want it? He has other problems. Why is it, if it's conditional, maybe they'll panic. So why not wait and see if they really do or if they really don't? But his way of explaining the Tosfos is as follows. He understands what the Tosfos, the Bali Tosfos are trying to say is that, as we know, the experience of receiving the Torah was an overwhelming one. Right? The Gemara tells us that their neshamas left their bodies. Right? When Hashem's presence came into the world, it was such an overwhelming spiritual presence that our neshamas didn't want to stay in our bodies anymore, and they flew out. And there's another one that every time Hashem spoke, it shot us back the distance of the encampment, and angels had to bring us back. Whatever it is, Chazal were telling us that the experience was so powerful, it was so overwhelming, that Hashem had to use a lot of different mechanisms to get the Jews to be able to receive the Torah. So basically, the idea was that the Jews, having experienced that, could say, this is Torah, this is what it means to have Torah. You know, we can't handle this every day. Could you imagine going to the Beis Medrash and every time you try to learn Torah, your neshama flies out of your body and angels have to come down and resuscitate you, and right? And so because of that, because the experience was so overwhelming, right, that the Jews didn't understand it was just the receiving of the Torah was like that. Everyday Torah learning was not going to be like that. So because of that, Hashem had to create a system where they had to go through the entire process of receiving the Torah, and afterwards the Torah would be regular, and we see that really at the end of the day, because during Purim they had this reacceptance of the Torah, we see that the Jews agreed with what Hashem did when he forced them to receive the Torah then. Up until then, however, we still had this challenge that anybody could have challenged the Torah up until this point. Mordechai Rabbi Reiser. So following the approach of Tosfos, we don't really deal with that problem, because how were the Jews punished, right, for those 1,000 years between receiving the Torah and between the Purim story? So that's Tosfos. Now the Maharal has a remarkable...
Including, by the way, the destruction of the first base of Mikdash.
Including the destruction of the first base of Mikdash, which is a punishment, obviously, and going into exile is a punishment, obviously, and the Jews who were killed and the wars that happened, and right? All these things, it's a big question, according to Tosfos. It's not clear in Tosfos how we answered that problem. So the Maharal himself has a pretty remarkable explanation for this contradiction between Na'aseh and Nishma and Kafalem Har Kegigis, and Kodesh Baruch Hu hanging the mountain over us. And the Maharal is coming from also philosophical, metaphysical problems, which is that if the whole world was created, right, the world was created for Reshis, the world was created for Jews and for Torah. Hashem was Istakel Baraisa Bara Alma. Hashem looked in the Torah and he knew how to create the world. Meaning what? Hashem built a world which was going to sustain a life of people who keep Torah, because otherwise, what's the point? Right? That's what Hashem is telling the Jewish people when he dangles the mountain over their head and he says, if you receive the Torah, great. But if not, the whole world's going back to Tohu Vavohu. The whole world is going back to pure anarchy if you don't receive the Torah right now. So, Na'aseh v'Nishma was an amazing, incredible insight that the Jewish people had. We came voluntarily, said we want to keep the Torah. However, if you just leave it there, then all the future generations and the nations of the world say, oh, Torah is a choice. You can choose to keep the Torah. You could decide, I don't feel like keeping the Torah today. Right? Nasiv and Ishmael. We'll keep it. We'll keep it. We spoke amongst each other. We decided we're going to keep the Torah. It's okay, God. We'll take it. And what would happen if they said no? Then what? Then God would just fold up his bags and go somewhere else? Right? So the Maharal says the whole idea of Torah is that morality comes from Hashem. It doesn't come from you. You don't get to choose, I'm okay with this morality. Hashem exists, morality exists, and you have to follow that whether you like to or not. So the Maharal answers the contradiction by saying that Nasiv and Ishma, the fact that the Jews volunteered to keep the Torah, that was a great insight that we had because we wanted to keep the Torah. Simultaneously, it's not really our choice. It's not really our choice. So Hashem hung the mountain over them to show to the Jewish people and to the world, morality is not a choice. I exist, and therefore morality exists. And in order for the world to exist, you have to keep this morality. Okay, that's how the Maharal answers the contradiction, beautifully answers the contradiction between the two occasions of Nasiv and Ishma and Kafalem Har Kegigis. And again, we were forced. Muda Rabba Reisa. Look, ultimately then, if you forced us and it wasn't our choice, then how can you punish us? Right? And then again, Purim. So we still have to deal with that. So the next step in dealing with that...
Maharal is saying that there is no loophole. Right?
Why?
Because the Maharal is saying this is the nature of God's universe. Is that you do have to keep this. That duress is part of my universe, in a sense.
Yeah, you don't get to walk away from the Torah. However, if I force you to uphold the structure, then when it comes time for Beis Din, you can say, well, then you can't punish me because you forced me. The question is liability here at the end of the day, right? Or culpability. Am I culpable for what I did? So if it's my choice, I'm definitely culpable. But if you forced me and I didn't have a say, how can you punish me? I never had a choice. I mean, that's essentially what the Gemara over here is saying, right? The second Hashem forces us to receive it, we have a claim based in against Hashem. Kiviyachol.
But isn't the Maharal saying that that's not correct? Because the nature of the relationship with God as described is it's not a voluntary process.
Correct. It's not.
You're into it and there's no way out, really. Right? Which means you are culpable now. Right? Because that's how I set up my rules.
Right. Okay. So we have to deal, no matter what, we can't escape the way that the Gemara understood the construct. Yeah. The way the Gemara understood the construct was the second Hashem forces us, we have a claim against Hashem. And the Gemara said that full well knowing that there was another pasuk out there where the Jew said Nasiv and Ishmael. And what the Maharal is explaining, if we're understanding the Maharal correctly, is that whether you keep the Torah or not, right? Whether you keep Shabbos, keep kosher, all these things, that's not a choice. However, the question is, how culpable do you become when you don't follow the rules? Because, okay, so maybe we'll do like this. What does it mean that I don't have a choice but to receive the Torah? Okay, and ultimately this is where everybody's going to be leading to. If we have to get rid of cartoonish images of the big man in the white beard and his white robe picking up the mountain and dangling it over everybody's head and saying, you keep my Torah, I'm going to drop a mountain on you. That's not what Chazal are telling us happened. Rather what? That when the Jewish people stood at Har Sinai, the revelation, the spiritual revelation they had was so clear and it was so deep that they themselves understood, we have to do this. Because it was so clear, it was no longer coming from a place of choice. Do I want to keep the Torah? Do I not want to keep the Torah? But that means that the Jewish people saw that if we don't keep this Torah, There's no world. Everything's just anarchy and chaos. And that's what it means that the Jewish people were coerced, they were forced to keep the Torah. They realized with complete clarity there was no other option.
What happened to free will and all this?
Good. So now we have to ask the question.
It
So
disappeared.
where's free will in this whole story?
They were like Malachim at that point.
At that point in time, when you have such clarity, when you get so close to Hashem, you lose your free will. You don't have free will. That's exactly what we're saying. So at that point, you can say, well, what's a punishment? A punishment is, here are the rules. You have a free, right? You have a free will decision. Here's what you, right? You accepted the consequences. We're saying we didn't accept the consequences. We didn't have a choice. So the coercion of the reality was such that we could not leave the Torah on the table. We had to take it. The question is now, once I act out against the Torah, how culpable can you make me? I hope that answered.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone's good? I mean, everyone's good, but it's... Are we all together? Okay. So the Tanchuma itself is a remarkable Medrash Tanchuma. It's in Parshas Noach. It's Os Gimel. It's the third large piece of Tanchuma. And that's probably the first Tanchuma anybody should look at if they want to understand the ideas of Torah Shebaal Peh, the Oral Torah. It's fascinating in its own right that it's there at the beginning of Noach. But Elo told us, Noach, the Medrash goes on in a long tirade all about the amazing nature of the oral tradition, Oral Torah. And basically, the Medrash wants to make the point that anybody who wants to succeed in Oral Torah has to be willing to eschew the pleasures of this world. Those are two things that do not mix. Somebody who's very drawn in and pursues the pleasures of this world cannot succeed in Oral Torah because of the nature of Oral Torah. Oral Torah is large. It's very exacting. There's a lot of small details in it. Some of the ideas are very difficult. And in order to truly succeed, a person has to be willing to kill himself, in a sense, push away the pleasures of the physical world in order to be able to succeed. Says the Tanchuma. The Tanchuma asks our contradiction. Nasa v'nishma on the one hand, Kafalam harkagigis on the other hand. Which one was it? Did they choose? Did he force them? Says the Tanchuma, the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma on the written Torah. They said, we'll accept the written Torah. The oral Torah, that's hard. There's details, it's big, you have to push away this world. That we can't accept. We're not willing to accept that. And at that point, Hashem says, guess what? There's no written Torah without an oral Torah. Package deal. Puts the mountain over their heads and says, you take these two together or else there's no world. Okay? So the Tanchuma now is starting to divide these two passages in Chumash. Nasa v'nishma was on the written Torah, and Kaflam Harkagigis is all about the oral Torah. So we wanted, using the basic idea of the Tanchuma, it sounds like we wanted the written Torah, and the oral Torah we had to be forced to accept it. Now the major windfall of this Tanchuma right now is that we finally have an answer to our question of what happened for 1,000 years between receiving the Torah and the miracle of Purim, that the Jewish people were able to be punished. As a matter of fact, it's actually pretty remarkable when you look at how it lines up, which is that for 1,000 years you can be punished. On what? On the written Torah. Things that deal with the oral Torah, then you have your claim against the Torah. But when it comes to the written Torah, you don't have a claim, because you said Nasa v'nishma. You said you wanted it. So this is what comes along with it. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the sort of things that Jewish people were struggling with in that time period before Purim, it was the big three. Shvichas damim, Gilui Arayos, and Avodah Zarah. Right? Murder, idolatry, and improper sexual relations. That has nothing to do with the Oral Torah. Those are basic, straightforward, written out details in the written Torah. And if you can't keep those big three, you can definitely be punished for them. The things that come after, in the second base of Mikdash, you see it becomes a lot more nuanced. It starts to deal a lot more with the oral tradition. Because it's all about apikorsim. This is the first time we're suddenly dealing with different types of heretics, which we never really saw before. All of a sudden, different nuances, different types of heretics. These ones deny the Oral Torah. These ones deny, right, all the different details. And ultimately, the thing that breaks apart the second base of Mikdash is sinas chinam, right? Sinas chinam is a much more internal trait. It's not the sort of base, outward, big three that we're struggling with before the Purim miracle. Okay, so that's the big windfall of the Tanchuma. We still have questions to deal with, which is, well, it's still a little bit funny, right, that we were willing to receive the written Torah and not willing to receive the oral Torah. I mean, why? Just because it was hard? Like, what was it about the oral Torah that it was, we couldn't just do it? Like, just step forward and just do it. So, there's a very beautiful Chasam Sofer, which we're going to bring, and then shortly we'll bring a piece of Torah that pushes it aside. But it's such a gorgeous Chasam Sofer that we should at least start with it, but we're going to start with it for another reason also. The Chasam Sofer actually brings us to a completely different pasuk in Parshas Vayeschanan in Dvarim. Where's the pasuk exactly? Yud Tes, right? Okay, Hey Kaf Daled. And there's an interesting switch over there. This is after the repetition of the Ten Commandments in Sefer Dvarim. In Deuteronomy, everything gets repeated. And we get the following. We have the Ten Commandments, and after the Ten Commandments, once again, we're in a situation of the Jews receiving the Torah, since this is the redaction of the first story, the doubling of the first story, and it says over here, Kol asher yedaber Hashem Elokeinu elecha, everything Hashem says to you, v'shamanu v'asinu. Now, switches the order. Here, Shmiya is before Asiyah. We'll hear it and we will do it. So, what if Naaseh v'Nishma, the fact that we said it, Naaseh v'Nishma, in that order was such a big deal, why all of a sudden in Deuteronomy are we switching the order? Which was it? Which did we actually say? Says the Chasam Sofer, building on our Tanchuma, an unbelievable thing. He says, Naaseh v'Nishma, that the Jewish people said, that was on the written Torah, remember? That's what the Tanchuma said. If it comes from God, no problem. Naaseh and then Nishma. I don't have any questions about anything Hashem says. If it's coming from Hashem, I'm going to do it. I'll figure it out afterwards. However, Kafalem Harkagigis, you remember you had to force us to receive the Torah Shebal Peh. Why? Because the Jewish people said, but when it comes from a rabbi, how am I supposed to do it before I know what he's going to say? What if he's wrong? He's a human. What if he makes a mistake? What if he makes a misjudgment, a miscalculation? What if he's not learned enough? How can we rely on the rabbis the same way that we rely on Hashem? We can't do it. Says the Chasam Sofer, so Hashem hangs the mountain over them and says, no, you don't understand. You don't have a choice. When the rabbis say something, you have to do it the same way as though it's coming from me. But the Jews couldn't accept that on their own. It was too difficult a concept. Hashem had to force them at Sinai to accept this concept that you do what the rabbis say, you don't ask questions. That was the way Hashem forced them at Har Sinai. what happened when it came to Purim. So, explains the Chasam Sofer beautifully. In Purim, there was this one rabbi who was a big troublemaker. His name was Mordechai. And this guy was always making trouble. There was a guy, Haman, who was a maniacal, power-hungry ruler, and he kept messing with him. You don't mess with a guy who's, one of the advisors to the kings in a country that's not your country. And not only that, he wouldn't bow down to him. And all the things that Mordechai did, and all the Jewish people were wondering, what are you doing to us? In the end of the day, after everything happened on Purim, they said, whoa, he must have known something. Because all these incredible miracles, this whole Purim story, this whole revelation we had about our relationship with Hashem, our ability to do tshuva, all came through him and all the things that he was doing, which we thought were crazy and were absolutely wrong. So says the Chasam Sofer, it was the process of Purim that brought them to the realization that the rabbis have siyata dishmaya. That Hashem gives people in the leadership position a special divine providence in order to lead, and that's when they saw it and they understood it, and at that point they could receive Torah Sheba'al Peh without being forced. Now you look like you have a question, Rabbi Ostreicher.
Yeah. My understanding is that Mordechai's status in the eyes of the community actually decreases towards the end of the Megillah. And one would think that if they're looking back at the achievements of Mordechai, his status would increase in their eyes.
Yeah. So you're quoting a Gemara in Megillah, and there it says that he was admired by Rov Echav, by the majority of his brethren. And the Gemara says Rov Echav v'lo kol Echav. It was the majority of his brethren who admired him, but there was a minority who didn't. And so the Gemara clarifies, well, who are his brethren? Is the members of the Sanhedrin. So there was a minority group in the Sanhedrin that lost respect for Mordechai because after the events of Purim, he took a position of leadership. Not because of what happened before the events, but what happened afterwards.
A secular leadership.
Secular leadership. He took a political position, and because of that, a minority of the rabbis lost respect for him. And that gets a whole discussion about which is greater. Is saving lives greater? Is learning Torah greater? And again, so it was the minority of the Sanhedrin. It wasn't the majority of the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says the opposite. The majority of the Jewish people revered him more. They finally understood the value of who Mordechai was.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's actually good. The Gemara actually comes to support this idea that beforehand the Gemara brings different verses. Ma'asi Yehuda, what did Yehuda do to me? Right, that Mordechai created problems for us. And afterwards we actually see a validation that the Jewish people gained tremendous respect for him. So that's the Chasam Sofer. Now, Rav Shlomo Brevda, Zecher Tag V'Racha, has a really beautiful sefer on Purim called Kimu V'Kiblu, where he quotes this Chasam Sofer and says everything the Chasam Sofer says, it's true and it's remarkable, but it's wrong. Meaning it's true, but it's not the pshat. Why? He says because if you look at Rashi and Tosfos over here in our Gemara, and the question is, what brought the Jews to finally kimu v'kibu, to come to a place where they were able and willing to accept the Torah in a way that they never could before? So Rashi and Tosfos both use a very specific phrase, which is ma'ahavas hanes. Because of the love that was engendered from the miracle, they were able to come to this new receiving of the Torah. And not surprisingly, Rav Brevda is going to bring the Vilna Gaon, because that's what he spent his entire life working on. And the Vilna Gaon, so basically his question against the Chasam Sofer is that Rashi and Tosfos are clearly not learning like that. Meaning it's beautiful and it's true, But Rashi and Tosfos obviously had some sort of different approach on how to deal with this contradiction and how to deal with the Tanhuma that was not like the Chasam Sofer. Because if the answer was the Chasam Sofer's answer, they should have said they saw, they understood about Rabbanim, that things were different. That's not what it said. It says, Ma'ahavas hanes, from the love of the miracle. That's what brought them to a place of Kimu v'Kiblu. So he brings a famous parable of the Vilna Gaon. One that I'm sure we all remember from our parents used to tell us, the parable when we would go to bed. That there is a king, and he has a son. And of course, every good Jewish parable has to start with a king. And he had a son who was a bit of a rabble-rouser. He was acting up. So the king had no choice. He had to exile this son from his palace. However, the king still deeply loves his son. And he knows that the world outside of the palace is a scary world. He exiles him into the forest. And he knows that if you leave a young man in the forest on his own who doesn't know how to defend himself, he's going to die. So the king actually sends his servants to follow the son. And anytime any trouble comes up, they should save him. That's, like a fail-safe. If anything goes wrong, you jump in. So the son's going through the forest and he gets attacked by a bear. He doesn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, in comes the arrows, right? The king's servant saves him. And he says to himself, wow, what an amazing coincidence. Here I was in the forest, getting attacked by a bear. And at the same moment in time, coincidentally, one of my father's servants happened to be right in the area. That's remarkable chance. And he goes along his way. And it escalates the process until one of the king's enemies comes and he attacks the son. And once again, the servant comes and saves him. And the son says, wait a second. This keeps happening. This can't just be chance. And the son puts together the pieces and he realizes that my father loves me so deeply, he didn't want me to get hurt. Right? But obviously, if he would have told me, if it would have been explicit, I never would have realized what I had done wrong to him. I never would have felt the pain of exile. And through the recognition of the incredible care his father put in towards his survival, he comes to do complete tshuva, and he comes back to the palace. Says the Vilna Gaon, that is the parable for Purim. The Jewish people misbehave, Hashem has to send them out. Things happen, they say, it's a chance, coincidence, amazing. Who knew? What luck we have. All of a sudden, when you're directly being confronted, you start to put together all the pieces and you say, whoa, Hashem was with us the entire time. He loves us so deeply, He would never let us really get lost. Through that, the Jewish people have tremendous love, and they do tshuva, and they come back. So, with that approach in mind, Rav Brevda says the following. The first receiving of the oral tradition was something that was done out of complete fear. The oral tradition is hard, right? It's a lot. We're not sure if we could really do this. We're not sure we really want to do it. But we'll do it. Why are we going to do it? Because we have a revelation that if we don't keep the oral tradition, the world goes to tohu vavohu. It's worthless, the whole thing. But when Purim time comes, and they survive the miracle of Purim, and they see how much God loves them, they see the tremendous care and love and concern God has invested into them, they say, you know what? We want to do it because we want to do it. Not because the world needs us to do it, because Kafalem Harkagigis. We want to do it because Hashem loves us so much. We want to show Him how much we love Him, and we're going to do the same thing back. And Rav Brevda brings proof from the fact that it was during this period of the second Beis HaMikdash, when they go back, that there's a proliferation of oral Torah to an extent that the Jews have never seen in the history before that, and a tremendous amount of mesiras nefesh. How do we translate that into English? Self-sacrifice to accomplish great levels of Torah learning. We see all the great Rabbanim who were poor, who came from families who didn't want them to go learn Torah, and they pushed through, and they became great people, and all of that happened through real life. As a matter of fact, he brings an amazing Gemara in Sanhedrin. I'm not going to pull it out, but basically, the Gemara brings psukim from Eishes Chayil, where it describes 3 periods of time in Jewish history where people were learning Torah. It speaks about the generation of Moshe and Yoshua, where everybody was learning Torah because they had all experienced it together. And then it speaks about the generation of Chizkiyahu. And it said that the way they used to learn Torah was he used to take a giant sword and stick it in the entrance to the base medrash. And there was not a city in Israel where the most ignorant person did not know basic laws of Tuma and Tahara, which is all oral tradition. And then we had the generation of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, where 5 Talmidim huddled under one blanket just to learn Torah together. And he says, what do we see? We see that generation of Chizkiyahu. What kept them in the base medrash? The sword. What's the sword? The sword is a symbol. It says there's a sword hanging over the world at any moment. You walk out of the base medrash and the sword drops. There's an oral tradition, and we have to learn it because that's what keeps the world going. That's yira. That's fear. In the generation of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, they didn't need a sword. They were willing to sacrifice themselves because they loved Hashem so tremendously. That is the approach of Rav Brevda. Okay. So the idea, the basic idea, and actually it's a Rashi not too far away from over here, is there's this idea of Gira and Ava. There are 2 ways of serving Hashem. I'm trying to remember. It's a Rashi on Shema Yisrael. V'ahavtes Hashem Elokecha. Rashi says, V'ahavtes Hashem Elokecha. He says there's a big difference between someone who learns from fear and someone who learns from love. Over here. V'ahavtes Hashem Elokecha, that's a person who serves Hashem out of love. Eino doma osem ava le'osem miyur. You can't compare a person who serves Hashem from a place of love and a person who serves Hashem from a place of fear. Why? Ha'osetz rabu miyira. If a person does what his master wishes because he fears him, kishuhu matriach alav manicho v'holech lo. When the burden becomes too great, he says, forget it. Can't do it anymore. It's too much for me. And he walks away. Whereas a person who does from love, even when the situation is difficult, right? He says, I would walk away, but I love my master so much, I can't give up on him. So that's the difference of the generation, that they changed from a place of serving Hashem from fear to serving Hashem from love. That was through the miracle of Purim, realizing Hashem had been with them throughout, and the new acceptance, the kimu v'kiblu that happens after that, is that they're now makabel, the oral tradition, from a place of love. Good, that's Rav Brevda's approach, built on the Vilna Gaon, approval, everybody likes it. Okay, good. So, it's not the approach of the Maharal, which is okay. Rav Brevda doesn't have to go to the Maharal, he's building on other sources. But there are still questions of the Maharal that are not answered over here, which is even still, with Rav Brevda's approach, we are minimizing the significance of the greatest event that ever happened in the history of the Jewish people, which was Nasa v'Nishma. That the oral tradition, we still can't accept it because we love Hashem. We had to be forced to accept it, and only through a whole miracle could we actually come to a place where we love Hashem enough, where we're willing to accept it on our own. It's still, difficult. You could fetch your way out of it, but the morale is still bothered by it, right? Even after everything we said, that question still stands. Other than that, I have a question on Rav Brevda, which is the following. Rav Brevda pushed off the Chasam Sofer because he did not fit into Rashi and Tosfos. What did Rashi and Tosfos say? Ma'ahavas hanes. And Rav Brevda explained to us this concept that the love which was engendered by the miracle brought us to a place of kimu v'kibul. But that's not what the words ma'ahavas hanes mean. Ma'ahavas hanes, nachon Eli, means that they loved the nes. Lo ahava shegaram hanes, ma'ahavas hanes. They loved the nes. The way that the Rambam talks about the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, and he says chavivus hanes, right? Chaviv hanes ma'od ma'od. That's a very beloved miracle. They love the miracle of Chanukah. There was something about the miracle itself that the Jewish people loved. Rashi and Tosfos said ma'ahavas hanes, from a love of the miracle itself. That's what brought the Jewish people to kimu v'kibul. So what does that mean? That they love the miracle. Miracles happen to us all the time. Why should we love one miracle more than we love another miracle? What was it about the miracle of Purim that they loved the miracle itself so deeply that it changed them in some sense, that they had a whole new receiving of the Torah? Okay. Fine. So like this. The Maharal in Or Chadash brings his approach to how to deal with the contradiction that's brought in the Medrash Tanchuma. Right? We have Nasa v'Nishma. We have Mitachti Zahar. A couple of them Harkagigis. We said this is Oral Torah, this is written Torah. At the same token, the Maharal says we don't ever want to come to a place where we're saying that the Jewish people didn't say we're all in on everything. Because this was the greatest accomplishment of the Jewish people. How could we minimize it in any way whatsoever? So the Maharal says the following approach. He says there's a difference fundamentally in the way one can receive the written and the oral tradition. When the Jews said Nasiv and Nishma, they said it on everything, no exceptions. We're accepting everything you have to offer. Doesn't matter what it is. However, the written Torah is something which can be accepted through our own desire, whereas the oral Torah cannot be accepted through our own desires alone. Right, the Maharal uses terms to express this idea, but the general idea, if we're understanding the Maharal correctly, is as follows. I had a good mashal in here. What was it? Yes. Good. Like this. Marshall, are you willing to accept the written tradition?
Okay. Yes.
There you go. You got it.
Good.
You got the whole thing. That's the whole written tradition. It's all in there. Are you willing to accept the oral tradition?
I don't know what it is yet.
I mean, I'd love to give it to you, but it's a few decades in yeshiva and kollel to see and understand and get to the bottom of the details. You're going to have to give up a lot of pleasures and things you're used to in your life that you've had up until now. So the Maharal says, how do you accept the oral tradition? It's something that you have no interface with at this point. I can say to you, would you accept your wife and you'll do your best to do that? Yes, I'd love to get married. Now, can you accept being empathetic, loving her through everything? I mean, I could say yes, but, let me be married for a few decades and I'll have a better idea. The Maharal says that is the receiving of the written and the oral tradition. When the Jews said Nasa Nishma, they said on everything. Of course they said it on everything. What the Medrash Tanchuma is coming to teach us is that the difficulty of oral tradition isn't a reason why they didn't want it. It was a reason because they weren't capable of doing it on their own. Hashem had to, on his part, force them to receive that aspect of it since they didn't have the tools to receive it on their own. The Maharal doesn't bring this, but I was thinking that it's very similar to the idea of Ger Katan. Right? There's a Gemara of a Ger Katan, of a child whose parents had converted and he was born before the conversion. And so he doesn't have das. He doesn't have the knowledge. Do you want to be Jewish? Right. Just like asking a 9-year-old, are you a Democrat or a Republican? He could say whatever he says, he has no clue what it means, which makes him similar to most Americans in America now, but that's a different discussion. You can ask him whatever you want, he could say yes or no, but he's 9, he doesn't know. So Ger Katan, the Beis Din says, through us you're receiving your Judaism. When he becomes a Bardas, when he turns 13, he has a Bar Mitzvah, he could reject it. But the Beis Din is kafa alav, right? They're saying, through us, you're a Jew. Right? As things stand right now. So Hashem says, through me you're receiving the oral tradition. When you're there in a place where you know what it is and you can understand it, and you can receive it on your own, you'll receive it on your own. Until then, I'm giving it to you. In such a case, right, Mordechai Rabbi Reiser, we have a great case against the oral tradition. Anything that comes up in the oral tradition, we could say, we don't have the tools for an oral tradition. Hashem's putting us in a situation where we're keeping it through his compact with us. But do we actually receive it? Do we actually have the oral tradition? Not yet. We don't really know what that looks like yet. Okay, do there any questions about the Maharal's approach? Yeah.
Is that the... I'm not sure if I'm 100% getting the image, but you handed Marshall a physical chumash.
Yeah.
So the Sefer Torah was written down. So that's the written Torah.
I mean,
it's very tangible.
We're not talking about, I mean, whether or not it was written down at that, it was not written down at that point, right? This is before the first luchos. This is before the first tablets, when the Jewish people said Nasa Nishma. The point is that can you receive something which is all written and organized and do what it says there? Yeah, I can open a book and do what it says there. Of course I can open a book and do what it says inside.
Because of its tangible nature?
Because
it's concrete?
It's concrete. That says what to do, and then you do it. It's not experience. There's an experiential change. Here's what we're looking for. When you ask me to receive the oral tradition, I have to actually change my nature. Right? The Maharal says the following. He says the Jews didn't have to be forced to receive the written tradition. Why not? It was their nature to receive the written tradition. Right? And if you know Maharal in a few different places in Tiferes Yisrael, over here, basically the idea is there's the Rashi in V'zos HaBracha. I mean, the Rashi is quoting the Medrash. It's also a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that Hashem went to the different nations of the world, right? And again, we all have I think sometimes we have a cartoonish vision of how this works. You know, he sits down with a council of Esav. They all sit and, he invites them. They have little chairs. They sit in a circle. Obviously, Hashem put nice snacks out for everybody to eat. And he says, look, I have this Torah. Do you want it? Yes or no? And they say, oh, it's Torah. No. What's in it? Well, okay, maybe. What's in it? What's in the Torah? And Hashem says, well, you can't kill people. And they say, oh gosh, that's not going to work for us. That's what we do. We kill people. We can't take the Torah. He goes to Yishmael, right? The same thing. Maybe he has different snacks on the table. Everyone gets there, right? Well, you want this Torah? Oh, Torah, maybe. What's in it? You can't steal. Oh, that's what we do. That's how we envision it. The Maharal has a different vision, that basically the nations of the world are not built to receive Torah. They have a nature to them, right? And their nature pushes them in a certain direction. And the way that Esav works is that there are certain things in Torah which are antithetical to that nature. At the moment there's something antithetical to the nature, they can't have a real Kabbalah. It's not a real Kabbalah. I can say I'm going to keep it, but it's not a real Kabbalah because there are things in Esav which are antithetical to Torah. The things in Yishmael that are antithetical to Torah. Klal Yisrael has nothing antithetical to Torah. Because their whole DNA, which was built from Avram Avinu, says whatever God says goes. They have nothing antithetical to Torah. So their nature is to be able to pick up this Torah and do everything inside. No question. Of course, why not? Oral Torah says you have to change and become something new. How can you receive that right now? I'm in the old state. I'm me as I am right now. You want me to be something else? I don't know. I don't know if I'll succeed in changing and becoming a living connection with Torah. And it's very fascinating. If you go back to that Tanchuma, the Tanchuma, right next to speaking about how difficult Oral Torah is, also tells us that the bris, the compact, the covenant between us and Hashem is only through Oral Torah. Right? Al pi hadvarim ha'elu. Al peh. Through the things that you speak, that's the compact, that's the covenant with Hashem. It brings about 4 different reasons why there's an oral tradition. And one of the things that the Maharal always points out that he builds out of this idea is that exactly this idea that we're discussing. If I want to have a relationship with Hashem, this isn't it. This is something that exists outside of me. The second I put it on the shelf, it's gone. It's done. Right? This isn't part of me. The oral tradition lives inside of me and through me, and that's how I complete this sefer over here. The oral tradition is all about how do the Jews give back to Hashem? Because it's a partnership. Right? If Hashem just says, here's your book, right? Go home. Have a nice day. Then there's no partnership. He gave me the book, I went home, and that's it. I didn't do anything. But if we're responsible for half of the Torah, which is called the oral tradition, and it lives and grows and finds its full beauty and expression through us, then this is a full partnership between us and Hashem. But change is hard. Change takes work. Right? This is what Rav Bravda was telling us. Nobody wants to change. People just want easy answers, right? They call up the expert. Tell me what to do, I'll do it. Give me the book, I'll read it, I'll do it. And the expert says, I'm sorry, in order to do that, you have to change. And then people say, I can't change. That's hard.
I am what I am.
I was born this way. We're not even going to talk about how many times people have said that to me. I was born this way. I can't change. Yeah.
It sounds like your typical bar mitzvah dilemma. That you get these svarim as gifts for your bar mitzvah, and the question is, do you put them on the shelf, or do you learn them and become a real bar mitzvah?
Yeah, I mean, what we're saying is that it's a oral tradition. In order to make it work, in order to receive it, in order to be a living portion of Torah, means you have to sacrifice a lot and be willing to change your whole nature. You can't make a Kabbalah on such a thing. I can't tell you how I'm going to change 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I have to experience it. I have to know what it is. I have to go through it. So that's what the Maharal says, not what happened. He says, Na'aseh v'nishma, we said, of course we're built for Torah. Of course we want the Torah. Yeah, we'll do whatever Hashem says. Right? Kafalim harkagigis. Well, I mean, we want the oral tradition. We'll do it, if you want us to have it, but is it a real Kabbalah? Did we really receive it? No, because we don't have the tools to even understand what it is entirely. We can't know what we are after the change before we've changed. We're in the old state now. That's in a new state. So that's how the Maharal deals with this entire contradiction. Now, the pièce de résistance, the coup de grace, is what happens in Kimu V'Kivu. Says the Maharal something unbelievable. He says 48 prophets, 7 prophetesses. Nobody added or subtracted from the Torah till Mikra Megillah. What's the best way to receive the Oral Torah? Use it. No mitzvah in the history of Judaism was added by the prophets other than this one. We had rabbinic decrees. Even King Solomon, right, had decrees about Netilas Yadayim. All of those were rabbinic ordinances. We're told in the Gemara here in Shabbos, there's something remarkably and entirely different in the nature of this one mitzvah. The Gemara itself asks, not over here, the Gemara in Megillah asks, right, my Darish, what drasha? I mean, where did they get it from? We know, and the Gemara over there, right, this goes under tremendous difficulty and tremendous lengths to understand how can you add a mitzvah. We know you're not allowed to add a mitzvah. No prophet is allowed to come along and say, I'm adding mitzvahs to the Torah. No such thing. The Torah is a sealed book. You cannot add mitzvahs. As a matter of fact, if any prophet comes along and says, hey, I got a new mitzvah, we say, great, we have a beautiful building, there's a view we'd like you to see, and then we push him off. You can't do that. You cannot add a mitzvah to the Torah. And so the Gemara over there attacks this notion, how do you add a mitzvah? He said, my Darish, what did they see? What drasha did they have? How did they find the source for doing this? What's the source? Kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer. They had a kal v'chomer. What was their kal v'chomer? Their kal v'chomer goes as follows. The Jews left Egypt. They went from slavery to freedom. They sang Shira. Right? On the sea, they sang Shira. Mi avdus lecherus. Sharu Shira, they sing Shira. Kol shekain mi mavis l'chaim. How much more so, if we're going from death to life, we should sing Shira. That was their kal v'chomer. If they sing Shira, we'll sing Shira. Now, normally, if you come up with a kal v'chomer like that, so we'll say to you, very nice, go say Hallel. But they understood that there was something different about this miracle, that we couldn't say a regular Hallel. Right? Mikra Megillah, Zu Halila. Right? This is its Hallel. Reading the Megillah, that's the Hallel of Purim. So what do we see? That the first time that the prophets are exercising the use of the oral tradition to add a mitzvah for all the Jews. Now it's a rabbinic mitzvah, it's not a Torah mitzvah. We can't add mitzvahs to the Torah. But they're exercising their koach, their ability, through the oral tradition to add a mitzvah. And by doing that, what have they done? They've now received the oral tradition. Because if I ask you the question, can you receive it? Are you capable of using it and the tools in it? Right? Yes, we just did. Yeah.
I'm good.
You sure you're good?
Yeah.
All right, I'm waiting for the questions because I got very silent.
The point that Reb Revda made was that, I think it was Reb Revda, was that there was a requirement of change of nature to receive the...
To move from yira to ahava, to move
Right.
from awe
Right.
to love.
Right. And that this revolved around the love of the nes.
Right.
So, like the Oral Torah itself, the nes is very subtle
Yeah.
in Purim.
Yeah.
The Jews who accepted the written Torah, right, were subjected to far more dramatic neses, splitting the sea,
Yes.
plagues, the destruction of Egypt.
Absolutely.
It strikes me as strange that they wouldn't have a love of those.
Good. Good. So you're going to set us up for the next step.
Okay?
We didn't answer the question that pushed us away from Rav Brevda in the first place, which was Ma'ahavas Anes. Ma'ahavas Anes. When you talk about nisim, you're talking about miracles. Probably the last word that you're going to come up with is love. Miracles are awesome. They are awe-inspiring. They are remarkable. They are frightening. They are, what do you do when there's a sudden freakish change of the whole nature of the universe? You say, wow, right? So all the miracles that happened in Egypt, the splitting of the sea, they were awe-inspiring. They were awesome. They were remarkable. But to love something requires a very different relationship to it. It's very hard to love somebody that you find awe-inspiring. That's the challenge of loving and fearing Hashem, right? So the idea is that all of those miracles had nothing to do with us. We couldn't even understand them. Go start to darshan to understand the nuances of a giant hail ball filled with burning fire, levitating in midair. I don't know. That's how Hashem did it. I can't tell you much more beyond that. There are certain things we can understand about why this plague than that plague, but the miracle itself is something that defies our understanding. We have no connection to these sorts of concepts. All the firstborns drop dead. All the water goes to the sides. Those things are all remarkable. They're breathtaking. They're awe-inspiring. But they defy my comprehension. That's how Hashem did it. The miracle of Purim is completely different than any other miracle that we had experienced. In that, it works entirely through nature. And as a matter of fact, this is one of the things that we see in the Megillah itself, that never once in the Megillah is Hashem's name mentioned. Right? Maybe it's all coincidence. Right? You ask the guys in the National Geographic, that's what they'll tell you. Right? They'll even find a way to tell you how the splitting of the sea was a coincidence, right? Well, there happened to be a tsunami that came right at the moment that they stood there, and then it came right as they left. Hashem's name is hidden because it's all working through nature. So the whole miracle was entirely different. But what happens is that all of a sudden the Jews look back and they start putting together the pieces. And each time they put another piece of the puzzle in, and they say, wait, do you remember, even before this whole thing started, how, this one got over here, he ended up in the city, there was the assassination plot. Every time they add a new piece, they are unraveling the love Hashem is expressing for them in a way that is in their language, and they totally get it. They totally understand every part of it. And they can explain all the details, and it gets more and more exciting. And every year they read the Megillah, and they go back through it, and they find another piece of the puzzle, and another piece of the puzzle. And they say, look at this. We can look at nature. We could look in the natural world. There are things that we can see, touch, remember. And we can put pieces together, and we can create a picture of how much Hashem loves us. And the miracle itself has a completely different nature. We connect to it. It resonates with us. We contribute to it. The more we understand it, the more we add pieces, the bigger the miracle becomes.
There's a moment for the boy in the forest.
Yeah.
When he says, this isn't a coincidence anymore.
That's right.
This is Dad.
Yeah.
At work here, right? And I love him, because he really did think this out. At what point does that happen for the Jewish people? Is it after they read the Megillah and they find out what happened?
Seemingly, yes.
It's a tell-all story, right, of palace intrigue that the average Jew on the street doesn't really know until he reads Megillah.
So seemingly for the average Jew on the street, it could be not till a year, 2 years, 3 years after all these events happen that and now the Megillahs are starting to come out and they're distributing them to the different 127 different countries throughout the empire, and they're starting to realize what happened. However, what's different in the way the Maharal is approaching it than the way that some of the other Mefarshim approach it is that according to everybody, we have a question of, well, what was this universal Kimu v'Kiblu? What did that look like? What did it mean for all the Jews to say, yeah, we're Makabel the Torah? They were in 127 different countries. They didn't even speak the same languages as one another. They might not have even heard the events at the same time. And they worked to give different answers to how that's possible. With the Maharal, that's not what the Kabbalah was. The Kabbalah was that the Sanhedrin sat down and said, we're adding a mitzvah. That was the Kabbalah. So they understood it was when the Sanhedrin got together with Mordechai and Esther, and they made the case. They explained to them, you don't realize what happened here. Let's go through all the details. And everybody in the Sanhedrin, we're talking about probably the Anshe Knesset Gadol, 120 people, started to realize everything that was going on, and they said, we've never experienced a nace like this ever. This is like, here's a nace where the more we talk about it, the better it becomes. Whoa, wait a second. There's this thing where we can use our understanding and our insights, and we can understand the nace. But a nace is something that comes from Hashem. It's something that's above nature. And then there's this parallel where they realize, Torah is the same way. Torah is this thing which comes from Hashem. It's above nature. We don't really understand it. There are basic things and premises and things that we can take out of it. But kashrus, shatnez, I don't know. But then there's this Torah Shebal Peh, which says you have the ability to look into this world and to say something about it. And it was experiencing the miracle of Purim. It was ma'ahavas hanes. Because they could relate to it, because they loved it so much, they said, we can do this. Kal v'chomer, we should have a Mikra Megillah. And by the way, it's a nice little drasha you can make. Mimavis l'chaim, you could understand that more than just the literal from death to life. It's hard to say that malachim are alive. Why? They definitely have some sort of existence, but it's not their existence. It's not normally what we would call life. If everything you're doing is because, Hashem's right in front of me, I don't have any free will, in some sense that's mavis, right? It goes both directions. If you have no relationship with Hashem, you're dead, you're lifeless. But if everything is Hashem, you don't really exist either. But when you find your place in Hashem's Torah, you've found a new Chaim. Chazal said, wow, there's a huge place for the Jewish people to be part of this relationship with Hashem. We just went, Mimavis L'chaim. Right? There's a parallel. Not only the physical Mimavis L'chaim, we went from a spiritual Mimavis L'chaim. Our spirituality is everything Hashem gave us. We have tools to generate our own ruchnius right now. We can look at the world and pull new things out and new ideas and create our own connection to Hashem without Him having to do it for us. And that's a remarkable feeling. That's incredible. Yeah.
It sounds to me, not to make it mundane, but like music lessons. Like a lot of people, their parents force them to take, let's say, piano lessons. And they got to go through the drills and do all the work, and it's not really them. They're just following what their parents said or the teacher said. But when that same student composes their own song on the piano, it's a whole different thing. Now the music is theirs. Because they've made a kinyan. They've made it part of who they are. This is their expression.
I'm going to give you a different mashal. At some point in my life, I ran into this fellow Ron. Now Ron got big bucks for recording gospel CDs. He was very musically gifted. Put him in front of a piano, and he could listen to a piece of music, and he could just spit it back out. But it wasn't until he was like 18 or something where he was like, boy, I should really learn how to read music. Right? Because when you're so engulfed in music and it's just part of you, you lack actually an appreciation of what you're accomplishing and what you're doing. But when he came back and he learned the theory and he learned how to put pieces of music back together and to do things with music that he didn't know how to do before because now he had new tools, that's what we're saying. It's not that you're being forced to do something you don't really understand. It's that it's just given to you and you don't really know what it is. It's so big, it's bigger than you. You don't even understand the motions you're moving through. It's only when you find a way to take it apart and put it back together, that's when the grandeur and the beauty of it you really connect to it and really picks you up. Any other questions? Got one more idea if we don't have another. Yeah.
There's a very troubling part of it.
Oh, please.
And that is that, it actually goes back to Adam Chab in the sense that we tend to have this tremendous appreciation of the fact that we overcome challenges and that we grow and that we do all these things, right? Which is really a factor of the sin in the Garden of Eden. Is to say, there was no need for any of this had we not had that problem there, right? And we've made an ideal of a result of a chet, that changed the world.
Yeah.
At that point. And we continue to do that, as if to say, well, because we overcame this challenge, because we now do this ourselves, as opposed to having, we've made it our own, it's not bread of shame, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we do it here again, that there's a nobility in the work of our hands. Right?
Yeah.
And it's a little troubling because it seems to me that the original plan may have been really good.
So we have to be careful when we talk about the original plan.
Prior to the nace.
Not
prior to the chet.
Yeah. Because, you're talking about...
It is a chet.
But you're talking about God, right? And God is not bound by space-time. So God, we have the famous contradiction that the Rambam and the Reiser and everybody's going to discuss.
And the Ramchal.
About how you deal with a contradiction between a omniscient... Sorry, that was the term which we've used. An omniscient God who's not bound by space-time and human free will. But the original plan is exactly what's happening now. The plan didn't change.
That's a whole conversation about it.
And even the whole discussion of what happened, and even the whole discussion of what happened in the Garden of Eden, right? There are many, many Meforshim who say that the result was human nature. It might not even be a discussion of one person, but the fact that people can only really survive and act in a certain way in certain circumstances. So I'll tell you the Chazal that the Ramchal, that the Maharal explains very beautifully at the end of Nesiva Emes, which talks about when Hashem wanted to create people, there was a fight between different malachim. There were malachim who said yes, there were malachim who said no. Ultimately, the malach of truth gets thrown to the ground. Right? And they bring a verse, V'titzmach emes, v'tishach emes arza, v'mina arza. I wish I was better at psukim, but the truth sprouts from the ground. That's ultimately the pasuk. Right? Truth sprouts from the ground. And the Maharal says that this is the mashal that we have for everything that happens through Jewish history. You have a seed, right? And this is not the way the Maharal expresses it, the way I express it. I can take that seed and I can bring it to a scientist. And I can ask him, what is this thing? What is it? And he can splice it, and he can analyze it, and he can break down the DNA and the structure of the molecules, and he can give me a projection more or less of what it is and what it's going to be. But if I want to understand that tree really, and that means every aspect of a tree, how it reacts to wind and sun and fires and location and overforesting and everything like that, there's only one way for me to get to that truth. I have to take that seed and I have to stick it in the ground, and then that seed has to fall apart. It has to die and deteriorate. And at that moment, the potential for the real tree to come out exists. That's how truth works in this world. There's a truth that Hashem lives in. It's too big for us. We don't get it. It was too big for Adam Arishon. He couldn't grasp it. And because of that, it had to deteriorate and become something. And in every generation, it has to deteriorate and become something new. And yes, we could have this idealized approach where we say, well, if only, if only, if only. But l'ma'aseh, at the end of the day, with the Yerida Sadoros, with the descent of the generations, we actually get a more nuanced experience of spirituality than the early generations had. That's how most of the Achronim approach the idea of Yerida Sadoros, the Leshem, the Maharal, all throughout, is that this idea that in order to really appreciate and experience, similar to this idea that we're talking about with the next Purim, right? In order to really get it, something has to fall apart, and then you get to put the pieces back together. By the way, the word chet, in its literal translation, does not mean sin.
Right.
It means a shortcoming, a lack, something which is missing. Right?
Yep.
That's the literal translation of the word chet. And different chataim worked very differently. We say, anybody who says that David, right, King David was a sinner, right, is making a mistake. And yet, he did do something wrong.
He said.
What do you mean he said?
David said.
Tanakh said, I'm saying.
What? Yeah.
Right? Okay, it's a kind.
Yeah.
Okay, one last idea, like this. This actually brings us to a actually pretty cool insight idea, which is we do see that all of the mitzvahs of Purim focus around one idea. The whole idea of shlach manos, mishlach manot, sending gifts out to one another, the whole idea of matanas levyonim, giving gifts to the poor, even the idea of Mikra Megillah and the 2 days, which is a longer discussion, all share one theme. They're all about bringing Jewish people together. It's all about achdus, right?
Absolutely.
Which is interesting because really the problem with achdus seemed to have been after we got back to the land of Israel. We don't really hear too much about Sinas Chinam issues before. Surely it's not Chazal's focus. Now it's true, Haman said that Yeshna Am Mufurad Ben Amim, right, the Jewish people, and they said that he knew how to speak Lashon Hara to point out our difficulties, that we like to congregate, oh, I can't daven in that shul, and oh, I can't daven in that shul, right, the way that the Chazan, and I don't like his kippah, and I don't like his accent, and whatever it is, and we'll do it our way, right? And certainly the idea of mitzvah is Purim is bringing everybody back together, but we see that didn't seem to be the main problem. The main problem were other discussions, that they ate at Achashverosh's Suda, and that they bowed to the idol, right, of Nebuchadnezzar, all those things. However, if we're taking the approach in the discussion we've been having tonight, we see that there's an essence to Purim, and this is hopefully what we brought out tonight, and something to think about this Purim. Purim is the time of receiving the Torah Shebaal Peh. And if Purim is the time that we're makabel, that we're receiving the Torah Shebaal Peh, we all know that the prerequisite to receiving Torah is achdus. We have to be ki'ish echad b'lev echad. We have to be like one person with one heart. So it was just something that I thought of as we're putting together these ideas, that we do see that there's a tremendous idea of achdus, of unity, in all the mitzvahs of Purim. As a matter of fact, it lines up very nicely with what we said, because if Purim is indeed one of the great ideas of Purim is that we're receiving the Torah Shebaal Peh on that Purim. We're certainly receiving it on every Purim every year after, and therefore a true receiving of the Torah comes when Jewish people are united and together and sharing together.
Shkoyach.
Yeah.